Good afternoon, everyone, or whatever the appropriate greeting is for our international guests joining us today. I am Orla Lahan. I'm the Education Manager with AHEAD, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this first live keynote talk of AHEAD's 2021 conference. Of course, as you'll be aware, we have a number of pre-recorded presentations also available on our conference site, which hopefully you've had a chance to look at so far. So it's been a very exciting way to kick off this conference. Reconnection, placing inclusion at the heart of online learning and support. Before we get started, I would just like to say thank you to the HEA who provide funding for our core higher education activities, and without whom this conference would not be possible. I would also like to just take a quick moment to thank all of my colleagues at AHEAD who are busy taking on many jobs today to make all these events possible. In particular, Trevor and Neve, who have done a huge amount of work to get us to this point. So I'm very, very grateful to all of them. Just before moving on to this first live keynote event, a few things to maybe just be aware of. We are recording this talk. The recording will be made available on our conference site as soon as possible, and captioning will be added to that video as soon as we receive it. Just to note also, this event is being live captioned. Captioning is available if you need to access the captioning, and thank you to Karen, for our captioner today. If you need to access those captions, you can press the CC button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We will talk through ways of engaging with us throughout this event. You'll already see there are some messages going into the chat box. Just to note, those of you who use screen readers, as you're probably aware, the chat can interfere with this. So just a reminder, you may want to disable that now, or if that suits you. During this event, we will be using the Q&A box feature to ask questions to the panelists. For all other if you have any tech issues or other questions, you can put those in the chat box, and my colleague Trevor will be responding to you there. As always, we would love for you to engage as much as possible in this event. And when we hand over to the speakers, there'll be more details around that. But just to remind you that our Twitter hashtag is AHEAD2021. There is space to leave comments on our conference site. Trevor will pop in a link to where you can do that at some stage. And as you're probably aware, we are hoping to pick up on the conversations and whatever comes up in this what proves to be a definitely exciting first keynote. And there will be time in the reconnection space after this event to continue the conversation. And I might just I'm interested because those of you who are at the orientation event on Tuesday, or who maybe caught the video that's gone up on the conference site, will know that Dara, our CEO, Dara Ryder, particularly has some interest himself in this keynote. So I might just ask you, Dara, is there anything you wanted to say before we hand over to our wonderful speakers?
Sure. I want to say I'm absolutely buzzing for this session because I suppose Tom and Anne are here today to tell the story of the AHEAD, SOLAS and ETBI UDL for FET project. So for our international colleagues, FET stands for Further Education and Training. So it's a very diverse sector here that involves vocational education, community education, apprenticeships. So it covers a lot of different areas. And we've been looking at this project for a little over 2 years now. So it's been, I suppose, a very long road. And I've been very, very involved in, particularly in the development of the latest guidelines phase of this project, which Anne and Tom have led on. So it's really, really close to my heart. And I'm delighted to say that the key resource from the project, which is the guidance and the associated UDL for FET resource hub, they're at the printers now, really, and SOLAS hope to make them available in May. So they're coming very, very soon for everybody in the audience to use. But I suppose my favorite thing about the project really is that it's being created really in dialogue with the sector. You know, there's been so much consultation with practitioners, with senior stakeholders of all kinds. I think that means the guidance that we've ended up with is very much based not just in the theory of UDL, but on the real practice that's actually happening out there right now all across FET in Ireland. So I think it's very authentic, very real, and I suppose in a way it gives an easy way in for practitioners to understand UDL practice and to actually, I suppose, hopefully see themselves reflected in it, that they can see their own contexts reflected throughout the stories that kind of the narrative is hooked on. So it's kind of a love letter to inclusive vet practitioners is what I like to call it. It's just it's got a big heart, is what I say, and I'm not going to say too much more about it because I'll spoil the guys' session. But huge thanks to Anne and Tom for joining us, for sharing their expertise with us over the last year and or so, developing this guidance. And yeah, I suppose that's my piece.
Yeah, thanks, Dara. And as I think everyone is probably aware, at this point, our theme for week 1 is universal design for learning in the online classroom. So this is a really lovely keynote to tie in with that. Before I hand over to Anne Heelan and Tom Tobin, just one note on the chat box. Some of you will actually be, so some of the preset may be just going to all panelists. So if you are leaving comments that you want people to see, you may just need to check that it's going to all panelists and attendees so that everyone can share the conversation. On that note, I'll hand over to Anne and Tom. We're delighted to have you here today.
Well, hi everyone. It's just brilliant to be back talking at another AHEAD conference, although I have to say it's the first one I've ever presented in my slippers. But for those of you who don't know me, I'm Anne Heelan, the former CEO of AHEAD, and I'm joined today by Dr. Tom Tobin from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So in this session today, what we're going to share with you is how AHEAD have been working with the Irish further education and training sector to move beyond the provision of individual disability accommodations to building a culture of what is true active inclusion for all of the full diversity of learners that we have across the FET sector, from mature people to people coming in with English as a second language, to school leavers, right through to apprenticeships, as Dara mentioned earlier. So it is really very diverse. And we do this by advocating for a framework of universal design for learning, because we believe it gets you to inclusion. As a teacher myself, many years ago, I've worked in FET in both Ireland and the UK. And I really wish I'd known about UDL back then in the classroom, because you were dealing with a huge diversity of learner, but really at the time, no particular tools to kind of manage that. So I know UDL would have really improved my practice and the experience of those learners. So you'll see now, when hopefully in May as well, when they come out, that the brand new UDL for FET practitioners guidance for implementing universal design for learning in Irish further education and training, which is the title of the booklet, how this book will help you to include all your learners in the classroom without the need for the individual add-on supports. It will also help to improve the learner experience. It will help them to become expert learners, increase retention and learner satisfaction. And I think particularly UDL is a great mechanism for reconnecting with your colleagues and other staff within your centres, and to nurture and develop professional learning networks to share good practices about UDL, your ideas, and growing inclusive design and practices. So like all good design, UDL puts the user first, and that voice of the learner is absolutely essential. Eileen Gray said, to create, we must first question everything. And we have questioned everything here and explored all the best practices and innovations in FET. Tom.
Thank you, Anne, and thank you to Karen for doing the captioning today, and to our hosts at AHEAD for hosting us here. On your screen, there are 6 icons that represent different disability challenges. So an eye, the icon for a person in a wheelchair, 2 hands representing sign language, the ear with the audio symbol, a hand touching Braille, and some Braille content on there. So before we dive into this new guidance, let's do a little brainstorming. On the screen are those 6 icons that represent those common disability support categories. And in the work that you do, what's one of the most common individual supports that you or your colleagues provide for learners? Let's put 2 minutes on the clock, and please use that time to take notes privately, share your response in the Q&A box, or wait until the end of the time and use the raise hand feature if you'd like to come on the microphone and share. By the way, for GDPR compliance, we should say that using the microphone gives us permission to feature you in the recording of this session. You'll hear music during the thinking time, and if you would like to mute that and have some quiet thinking time, we'll also signal in the chat when the music will be ending. So let's put 2 minutes on, and let's hear what is one of the most common individual supports that you give to students. Two minutes goes by quickly when you're thinking, and thank you everybody for your thinking. I'm looking in the Q&A box now, and we have a few responses here. Before we open that up, I want to check with our folks behind the scenes. Has anybody raised a hand in order to come on the live microphone?
No, you're all good there, Tom.
All right, thank you very much, Dara. But this is also one of the powerful things about universal design for learning. By giving everybody some choices in how you do the thinking, how you take your notes, how you demonstrate your skills, communicate with us, even if nobody chooses to use that live microphone, just having the choice means that you're more likely to take action, take responsibility for your own ideas, and to be in the thing. I see that there was a raised hand there for a second. Caroline, did you want to come onto the microphone and respond real quick? And our co-host might need to give her access to a microphone here.
She'll be able to talk now. Caroline, I think you just need to unmute yourself.
Sorry, apologies, that's my fault. I hit the end by accident. It wasn't intentional.
No worries.
But thank you anyway.
No worries.
Phantom hand, as we call it in the Zoom age.
Absolutely. But now that we have proof of concept that folks can come on the microphone, Anne and I are interruptible today. So if something we say sparks an idea, or you have a short story to share, or you have a question and you'd like to have it answered right here, right now, please put that hand up and come on the microphone, or post something in the question and answer area, and we'll get to it. But our question for you was, what's the most common individual support or accommodation that you give to students? And folks have posted them here. So Thomas is talking about assistive technologies. Charles is saying access to readers or scribes for assessment accommodations. Column says literacy support apps. Dipankar says I'm in learner support and I do various kinds of supports, including disability, academic, and skills support. Someone who is attending anonymously says extra time for exams. Another person says support time with small groups of learners who are working on similar courses. Similar support needs with a teacher who can help them with assignments, assessments, study skills, and so on, so they can work together and learn from each other. Charles is talking about recording tutorials, and Michelle says demonstrating and assisting learners to put extensions into Google Education Suite so that they can be more independent. I love the way that you're framing this, because the main reason that we created that UDL for FET guideline was to help practitioners to shift their work away from time-intensive one-to-one individual support wherever it's possible. So what Michelle is talking about, one of our anonymous attendees is talking about, and moving toward practices that lower barriers for every learner, freeing up time and resources for learners who have those pressing individual accommodation needs. So just a reminder that we are interruptible today, so post your ideas in Q&A or raise your hand anytime during the session, and we'll bring you into the conversation. Now, the image on your screen is shifting. There are 5 boxes on here that talk about some of the things we have stories about in the UDL for FET guidelines. So there's offering students to act on what they know, supporting expression, offering choices in how people demonstrate their learning, giving students different ways to understand information. And there's some images that represent all those things. But not all of our FET learners fit into the traditional teaching and learning model that many of us were raised on. Some people have learning difficulties. Some people have language challenges, different abilities, come from different cultures and backgrounds. Educators all want to support them to do their best. And UDL, Universal Design for Learning, gives learners more ways to understand content, more choice in how they demonstrate what they know, and more tools to support their learning via multiple means of engagement, representation, and action and expression.
Okay, so the primary purpose of the project was to make accessibility just part of what everybody in FET does. So as Tom says, it's to minimize the one-on-one accommodations and to maximize learning in the classroom for everybody. Now, if you look at the pyramid, you may be all familiar with this pyramid of UDL. Level 1 is what we call the classroom. It's the main place where learners learn, whether they're in a training center doing woodwork, or they're in a community center doing ESL, or they're doing nursing in a PLC. It doesn't matter. They're sitting in a classroom and that's their experience of learning. So it's trying to actually minimize the individual accommodations there, especially the cookie cutter ones that get baked into the repertoire supports that often are delivered to those students by disability support, who maybe make assumptions that students, for example, with dyslexia may need a reader, where it might in fact be something entirely different. So for this space to be inclusive at this level 1 and to be barrier-free, everyone really working in an ETB or in a training center needs to be on board with the idea of universal design for learning. And this means everybody from managers to teachers, curriculum designers, quality officers, counselors, internal verifiers, and external authenticators. Everybody really needs to be singing from the same hymn sheet and understand what UDL means from their particular professional perspective. For example, if you're going to design assessment briefs, then really the verifiers need to be talking to the teachers and the managers and everybody else. So it's a joined up approach. But having said that, we have, and we heard earlier from one of our listeners, that we have different levels of support, and academic skills, and level 3 and 4 move up into where we get more individual supports. So the whole pyramid is not about reducing or taking away individual supports. It's actually ensuring that that everybody gets what they need. I think an important element of all of this is that the different services are not siloed, that they all talk to each other purposefully about universal design. And in this way, those common or recurring supports can be moved into the mainstream where it's practical. Tom?
Thank you, Anne. And now the same pyramid is on your screen with the different levels to it. And we're going to talk a little bit about universal design for learning versus individual supports. And on the screen also is the framework document that was the basis of our research. So our initial work with disability support officers in FET recognized that the way UDL could make individual supports less standardized. How many of us have said, you know, here's extra time on your test, here's extra time on your test, here's extra time on your test, and making those things more meaningful for specific learners. This research led to the publication in March 2020 of a conceptual framework of UDL for the Irish further education and training sector. And you see the cover of that report on your screen. And that reflects the evolution of the theory of inclusion, the progress of legislation around accessibility, the difference between universal design in the physical environment and universal design for learning in the design of interactions, and key concepts that need to be considered for the FET circumstances. That research helped us to adopt the CAST model of UDL based on research in neuroscience and the learning sciences. CAST are the folks in Boston, Massachusetts, who came up with the concept of universal design for learning. The research also helped us move from that CAST model to engaging with the FET community and getting the buy-in needed to build UDL professional learning networks. And we'll talk about that in a couple of seconds. And it also helped us to involve everyone in a community approach to building a culture of inclusion that recognizes a broad diversity of practitioners and program types.
So in collaboration with our FET colleagues, with SOLAS and with the ETBI, we created a really practical how-to guide for FET practitioners. And it will be coming soon in May is the date for it. It's in the printers at the moment, as Darren mentioned earlier. So here is a brief peek into how we created it and how we can use the ideas from it to advocate for broader and more inclusive environments and practices in your institution. It is about how you can be continuously improving the learning environment for your learners.
And the first thing on your screen are a number of people who were part of listening sessions, and it says interviews, visits, and data gathering. We communicated to the sector, we sent out invitations to events on the Universal Design for Learning framework. We listened to all of the different stakeholders, and this took some time, but we extended our project with SOLAS. We wanted robust and authentic feedback from people who were actually practicing in the further education and training sector to gauge their feelings, their frustrations, and their hopes for the future. We listened to everyone. We presented to directors, held a national World Cafe seminar with disability officers, counselors, teachers, and principals, made 8 different site visits around Ireland, and talked to individual practitioners.
So through all of this,
And Anne's going to talk to you a little bit about a video clip that we're going to introduce here.
Yes, well, our FET colleagues throughout the whole process of collaboration have asked us, well, you know, how do we actually go about doing this? So we decided to make it very practical and made the stories of the people who are doing this creative hard work. I think it was really important to note that inclusion isn't new to FET. It's been going on for quite some time. But therefore, what we wanted to do was celebrate and show those examples of innovation and inclusion that are in the sector already. We visited the FET centres across the country, interviewed dozens of practitioners, including those who are involved in the Active Inclusion Network in Cork. And here is a clip of some of them talking about their approach. I think it should come on any minute. Yes,
Yep.
Here it is.
I've just got to cue it up here a little bit.
Doing the digital badge for Universal Design for Learning, one of the things that really struck me most was the little changes that I made it didn't just benefit, you know, the students with disabilities. These changes that I made benefited everybody, and I was surprised that I was actually hearing it had the biggest impact maybe on people that I hadn't expected. It's the mature learners returning to education after 20 years, you know, and I suppose the very diverse group of learners that we have. It's learning how to make everybody feel included.
Well, I've noticed in the classroom there is a greater need, much more diversity in the classroom, and I need to be in touch with that as a teacher. But also personally, I've been teaching for a few years now, and I'd like to be involved in something new, something different to freshen up my career, and it's certainly been very positive in that.
Very much hands-on approach. So getting the students to take ownership of their own learning, that was definitely the big thing. And that has empowered them and give them more confidence, and, you know, kind of handing it back to them almost, going, you know, this is not just my class, this is your class.
I introduced a video tutorial for students that didn't have the software at home to do their bookkeeping. It was a very simple thing, but I suppose it provided such a support for them in their own pace, and the digital badge for me was fabulous, and it was something that I would look into for other modules next year, just providing support, simple, and I just hadn't done it before.
I've been able to adapt my mindset and look at things differently, look at students differently.
Okay, so you heard of stories of people there who actually did the UDL badge and made small changes that made a huge difference to their practice. So for this guidance, we took a very problem-based approach, structuring the document around these very real stories from across FET programs. We worked with practitioners who shared the challenges they were having on a daily basis and how they addressed those challenges to the application of various UDL principles. For example, the adult literacy tutor who used a community garden project to create multiple ways for her students to engage with, encounter, and demonstrate their mastery of everyday calculation needs. Or the maths teacher on a youth reach program who mapped the maths function into an occupational real-life story of an electrician costing the job so they wouldn't sell themselves short on the day, which really appealed to his learners. Practitioners who read any of the earlier drafts of the guidance were really thankful that it wasn't just a list of, oh, you have to do it this way, items, but that the learning came through the stories of people that they were working with and whom they actually knew.
And Nisa has a question in the Q&A. How do you do the UDL badge? Are any groups currently offering it? Go to ahead.ie, and the UDL badge is offered on a regular basis. So I know that our team behind the scenes is like cheering and shouting at that question. So
just to jump in very quickly, Dom, if you don't mind,
sure.
Just to say that it is going to be run, a national rollout will be run in October of this year. So that's the big opportunity for the national FET and HE sectors both to take that at the same time.
Oh, splendid. Thanks, Dara. And that actually goes into what's on your screen now. There's some text that says starting small, and then there's some advice there. And the concepts in universal design for learning are, if we apply them fully, a lot of work. So to help practitioners, the principles of UDL are introduced in the guide only after examples of how to start small are shared. And an incremental, iterative approach is consistently shown in all of the examples, problems, and narratives throughout the guidance.
The guidance also pauses for every story, every segment of information, and every how-to section in order to ask the reader to reflect on their own practices and to expand beyond their own individual efforts by reaching out to colleagues in various ways. This gets us back to the two themes of this presentation: inclusion as community and broadening accessibility for everybody without removing needed supports.
And a key part of this project is the creation of a resource hub with examples, references, and ideas to go beyond just the core guidance document. Because the guidance document purposely simplifies UDL to allow practitioners to take a first step or a step zero, the Resource Hub becomes a natural next place to help FET practitioners to expand their work, their networks, and their interactions. So the Resource Hub also expands practitioners' community, placing them in touch with people from around the globe, perhaps you one day.
So I think people working in education will often say, teachers or counsellors, that often they don't get a chance to talk to their colleagues about their professional practice. Maybe they talk in the classroom about other things, but you very rarely get the chance to share what you're doing and how you're doing it and what innovations you have. So we don't get enough time for those kind of purposeful conversations with colleagues. So a final call to action for all of you is to think of inclusion as a means of creating connections with your colleagues, of reaching out to the community in your centre or in your ETB or even across different programs. There are many stories in the guidance of people who've set up very successful professional networks, professional practice networks. And they're very much based on people coming together either formally or informally. People who maybe share a passion, who want to improve things for their students, and bringing together a group of people with different perspectives and different voices, I think can really add to the learning that takes place within the network. Because the network is really about giving people confidence to do something new. Somebody else has tried it, they can try it too. They have the same values and they can sort of try things out, bring it back into the network and experience that mutual support that you get from working with colleagues in an environment that is familiar to you all. It does require commitment to try things out, to go ahead and keep doing new things, but that's okay. In your role as professional educators, you are best positioned to set up these professional networks and to work with your colleagues, not only for your learners, but also for yourselves. Years ago, there was an expression, I don't know if any of you remember it, I'm showing my age now, called PLUs, people like us. And it was a kind of a derogatory term, but in this case, I think we should seek out people like ourselves, people with the same sort of commitment to improving the learner experience. And people who want to change and bring fresh perspectives to their own practice. I mean, for example, maybe you're not a great multimedia person, but there could be somebody else in your centre, in your group, that was really good at using maps and apps and could give you great information about what apps would work for certain students and whatever. So you can really learn by bringing staff together, either formally or informally. And really just about creating inclusive environments that helps everybody. Tom?
And thank you, Anne. As Anne has mentioned, those professional learning networks, PLNs, that was the real takeaway for us when we were doing our research. We found out that everybody agrees that inclusive design is the right thing to do, and then you kind of run into a wall sometimes. I don't have the training, I don't have the time, I don't have the resources. How would I actually implement this in my particular situation? And what we found was when we got people into the room together to talk to one another or on a Zoom call, or they had some way to communicate and share their experiences, suddenly the ideas came out and people were able to support one another better. On your screen is an image of an instructor up at the front of a classroom pointing to a chalkboard that says healthy lifestyle plan. And there are various learners in the class environment. There's a returning learner, a learner who's using a wheelchair to get around, a learner with some books, a learner who is wearing Pakistani headgear. So lots of different variety among the learners, and they're all thinking the same thing. Why does this matter to me? And this is the question that all of our learners ask, and it's also the question that we want to ask you. So now that you've heard more about the model that we've put together, we'd love to hear what will you take away from our time together today. We wanted to make sure we had a lot of time for Q&A and ideas here at the end, but just for now, what's one thing that you want to try one thing that you're already doing and we've underlined that as being important for you, or one question that you still have. Use that raise hand feature under reactions and we can bring you on the live microphone and you can be part of the conversation that way, or post something in the Q&A section and we'll do our best to answer those queries as well. So let me give a couple more minutes. I'll put some music on again as we did before. And then we'll open it up for some more open conversation about this project and all those things. So here goes 2 minutes of music. And thank you, everybody. We've got a couple things in the Q&A and a couple people posted in the chat as well. I think these are some takeaways. Dipankar says in the chat, hopefully the UDL document will bring about a top-down process of integrating inclusive practices into the FET division. That's kind of our goal. One of the big challenges that we see is that when you're working with sort of grassroots efforts, where we all agree it's the right thing to do, but you don't have a lot of support from your center director. You don't have a lot of support from your government ministries. You don't have a lot of support from the people who are running the places where you work. Then maybe we get 10% of people to do inclusive design. But when it's something that has a benefit for everybody and everybody has a template to work from and a model to go through, we get a lot better implementation and those kinds of things.
If it's okay, Tom, I might come in and comment on that, if that's all right.
Please.
Sorry, I shouldn't be interrupting you, but I can't help myself.
Well, Dara is actually an author on this document too, so come on in.
Yes, I know. I just wanted to comment on that one because I think one of the really interesting things about how this project has developed, and because it's been so consultative and we've been out in the sector consulting all this about the senior stakeholders and the practitioners on the ground, I think what's happened is the dialogue is already affecting national policy. So you've noticed in the FET strategy last year that there was very clear commitments made by SOLAS to a universal design approach to providing consistent learner support, and specifically in adopting UDL in the design and delivery of programs for future FET. So I think that's a lot of that is to do with the momentum and the kind of that was generated by the national dialogue that took place there. So I think that's going to help us to bring the top down and bottom up kind of approach, hopefully to meet in the middle.
Oh, fantastic.
Could I come in there as well and just say that I mentioned earlier that everybody needs to be involved in that, and that includes senior management, managers and the centre directors. I think this is really important because I think if you can frame universal design as a process of continuous improvement, which is, when you think about it, you've got a learner in the classroom. That's your business in FET. Learning is your business. So quality assurance has to be about improving the experience of the learner, because if they're not learning, we're all wasting our time, to be honest. So I think if we see this as a quality assurance issue that needs to be included in all conversations across the ETB, across centres, about how we make improvements, then I think you'll find it's a top-down approach.
And there's a couple of comments in the chat and in the Q&A that go along those lines. Orla is saying, trying to spread and share the ideas throughout my center, some guidance from FET to centers would be great. And Merja is saying in the Q&A, you're going to spread the idea of UDL around Ireland. Tell more about that, please. I'm thinking how to spread the idea in my university too. Do you want to speak to some of the advice that we got from our colleagues and that we put into that document?
Well, I think that one of the things that we can all do is talk to our colleagues and reach out to our colleagues. I think that the professional learning network, whether it's an informal one or a formal one, is a really good way of getting the conversation with the purpose about UDL going. So you can even have an informal, like at lunchtime, bring people together that you know are interested in this to share your ideas and get started. And then maybe go to your management to set it up more formally. As well, of course, as encouraging people to do the +1 in their classroom. So if they see where their students maybe are struggling, or maybe where there's always a, try something else. Whatever way you present your information, present it in one other way. Gives the students one other way of doing things. That's a good way of starting in your practice.
I think as well from the national approach, if it's okay, Tom, I just add from a head perspective, just for those who don't know, there's been a bit of chat about the UDL badge, which is it's a national program that we run national rollouts of once a year. So there's quite large numbers participate in that, and that's part of how we are trying to build the understanding of UDL around Ireland. So the guidance is just one feature of it, and the national rollout of it, I suppose, is for both FET and HE practitioners. So it's about trying to build a common understanding of inclusion through UDL and through that badge. So that takes place, it's a 25-hour, 10-week course that takes place once a year, kind of in the latter half of the year, towards the end of semester 1.
And that speaks to getting peer recognition for having these skill sets. And the folks in Cork put into the Q&A, they say, I would like to build up a network and share ideas. I'm already trying to offer multiple means of assessment, but I think I need to be more encouraging around different methods, scaffold the ideas a bit better with the students and get more buy-in, perhaps just be more confident around the process. We're really happy when this document comes out in May, because there are stories from your colleagues who had that precise challenge, and they go through step by step how they address them. So thank you very much for the comment on that one. Caroline's putting into the Q&A, review a module that was pivoted and include more UDL practices. Some did not work this year, but hopefully they will with more thought. Oddly enough, I would never wish a pandemic on anyone. At the same time, the pandemic where now everybody has a barrier to learning. So they're on their mobile devices. We can't get together in person. We've all got a barrier that we have to address. That means that people are starting to see teaching and learning itself and all of the support practices that go around that in more of a holistic way, as more of a set of good practices, rather than, oh, we have these people over here who need the accommodations, and then these people over here who are totally just fine and we don't have to bother with them. We kind of have to bother for everyone. We have to design for everybody. And Caroline, I love the way that you have framed your comment, because it talks about how now everybody is thinking about access to education as one of those fundamental practices. Alexandra in the Q&A is saying that she's definitely interested in the badge with a head, looking forward to the release of the UDL for FET Resource Hub and the documentation. So thank you for the comment on that one. Anya Mozala says, thanks so much for the presentation and good work that you're doing. In terms of top-down approaches to inclusion, how does inclusive design complement UDL? Do we need to embrace these two different designs? Universal design for learning is a subset of inclusive design. Inclusive design encompasses things that happen in the physical environment, as well as things that happen in the interactions that happen among learners and materials, their peers, us as instructors, us as support personnel, and with the wider world. UDL just focuses on the interactions themselves, where inclusive design and universal design focus on the physical environment. I think I saw John raise a hand over there in the participants menu as well. Did you want to come on the live microphone for a second?
No.
All right, no worries.
Yeah, sorry.
We can hear you now, John.
Oh yeah, I was just I actually clicked on the wrong button, but I'll say something as I did put my hand up briefly. Just one of the things that I've discussed in the past around you talking about the top-down approach was making sure that in your sort of equality and your policy section in your course design approval that you build in an element of making sure that you've got UDL or inclusive practice built into that, and also into academic promotion pathways. I know in many institutions they're probably further ahead than mine, but certainly in some older, more traditional institutions, that's probably a key way of trying to get some traction.
That makes a lot of sense, and I think it goes along with the comment that you put in the chat that you've been pushing for evidence of UDL to be part of course approval or part of the academic promotion pathway, and that means that everybody has to pay attention to it, which is fantastic. There's a couple of comments in the chat that go along with that as well. Mirja is asking, have we done research on learning results achieved with the traditional way versus with UDL? And we've got a lot of comparison studies, both in North America and in Europe, that when we make interactions more inclusive, when we give people more agency, more control, more of a sense that they are part of rather than apart from, then our students persist with us better. In other words, students who are there on day one, they're there to do the final project more. Students are retained better. Students who take a class from me come back to take a class from Anne, come back to take a class from you. And they are more satisfied with the education that they receive. They're more likely to recommend us to their friends. They're more likely to say that they got value out of their educational experiences here. There's a couple more comments and ideas in here. I want to make sure we give voice to as many of them as we can. We've got about 5 more minutes left. So from Charles in the Q&A, he says, I'd concur with what Anne is saying. If we integrate UDL into our provider and quality assurance policies and procedures, there'll be a gradual integration and universality for all learners as opposed to individual supports. That's kind of the sneaky message that we've got here too, is that we want this to go into and by the way, it's already in the QQI standards, for example, for a lot of different programs. Many people think there's only one way to meet those QQI standards. QQI standards, they're hip to giving students options and alternatives, and they've been for a long time. So thank you for that as well. Here's a takeaway from an anonymous person. The key focus is extending UDL beyond disability to be more culturally responsive and reflect the overall diversity in our cohort of learners. Fantastic. Here's one, Anne, I'm hoping you can come on to. Maeve is saying, really interesting discussion on UDL. Love the practical example in the video. Are there examples of projects where students give feedback and contribute to the development of universal design for learning to enhance inclusion and participation of learners in the classroom activities?
Well, I think that's really important, because universal design, the conversation and the collaboration has to be with the students as well. And I think this very much happened. We have an example in the document around the health sciences, where the instructor involved the students collaboratively in how they were going to do every single aspect of the course. Now, obviously, the learning outcomes are fixed. They cannot change them. But in terms of how you get people to that standard, it's not standardized. There's lots of different ways. So in the book, this tutor sat down and explained, first of all, universal design as to why she was giving them options and choices. And then what she did very clearly was sit with them and brainstorm and have world cafes on what they wanted to do. So they interpreted and discussed, and this is all part of understanding the actual language involved in learning outcomes, which can be difficult in their own right. But they teased out and made sure everybody understood what path they were on. And then the students were able to come up with a way of reaching the standards. So they interpreted it as they would do research within their centre. So yes, I think you can very much involve the students in all aspects of how you implement the course and how it's assessed.
Awesome. And there's a couple of wrapping up comments here that make a really good coda to our conversation today. Dipankar says, there's a tiny danger that UDL might be equated just with digital learning due to the coincidence of the pandemic. That was something that when we were developing the guidance document, there was some conversation. Do we mention the pandemic in here? And we decided not to, because Universal Design for Learning isn't just a response to the pandemic, and it's also not just technology tools helping us. You can do Universal Design for Learning with no technology at all. And in the guidance document, we give some examples of no tech, low tech, and high tech responses that are universally designed. And here's the thing that I'd love to maybe end on here. Siobhan is saying ETBI, the Education and Training Boards Institute in Ireland, will support ETBs, the Education and Training Boards, to develop universal design for learning approaches across the sector. That might include the development of communities of practice, professional learning networks, and that'll be informed by practitioners in the sector. So I love the fact that there is commitment from everybody, and we've got a lot of different organizations who support instructors, administrators, staff members, and Carol Neenan is saying there's a real focus now on the learner voice. There's a myriad of focus groups taking place throughout the country to decipher what the learner experience is and what is working for them according to them. And Universal Design for Learning works best when we have that by us, for us approach. And so I'm going to turn it over to Anne to close us out here, but this is fantastic. Thank you, everybody, for making this a good conversation.
Yes, and I think just to mention there that the ETBI have been a partner throughout this whole process and the development of these guidelines. So they're fully on board, particularly with the learning networks. So I want to thank you all for attending today and for all your ideas and your questions and your enthusiasm. So check out the AHEAD website at ahead.ie to see when the final version comes out in May. I suppose it'll also be on the SOLAS website. And let us know, we'd really love to know, moving on, how you're going to use it, how you've adapted it and how you've used it in your own practice. We'd love to hear from you. We'd like to continue on this conversation. So our contact number on the screen is universaldesignforlearning.ie, is myself, or thomasjtobin.com, and obviously ahead.ie. So we hope you enjoy the rest of the Reconnection Conference over the coming weeks. And thank you all for being advocates for a very inclusive world. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Anne and Tom. That was a really, really brilliant talk. And I think you both ended on lovely notes referencing the support that's out there, and Anne referring to the advocates. It's clearly a really practical resource that's on the way. And I think that's backed up by the comments we saw on the short video. So definitely something for everyone to keep an eye out for. Just really, really briefly, again, thank you, Anne and Tom, and thank you everyone for being here and engaging and participating with some brilliant comments and questions.
Arlene, do you mind if I throw in one or two thanks before you wrap? I just forgot, we never mentioned Mary Quirk and Dr. Patricia McCarthy, who were also really big contributors to this story with the research that they did on the framework. So just wanted to throw that in there, and also to say that although this is a UDL for FET resource, I believe it's actually going to be a really valuable resource for the higher education sector here in Ireland too. So I just wanted to throw that in, that it's not, it's FET specific, but I think it's very transferable, a lot of the learning in it.
Thanks, Sarah. Just to remind everyone that Anne and Tom's presentation materials are available on the conference website for anyone who might want to look back over them. The video, we are recording this and we will put the video up as soon as we possibly can. Hopefully that will be sometime early next week. So as you know, our next event is the Reconnection space, which is a time and space for chatting, hanging out, having a chat. I know Tom and Anne have posed some interesting questions, so people might have a lot on their mind right now. So just to remind you that you will, it is in a separate Zoom link. You will have to leave this Zoom webinar and join the Reconnection space via the conference site. So Trevor might post the link to that page there in the chat just so people have it. A reminder that we have some more wonderful live sessions for you tomorrow, starting at 2 p.m. with some workshops and presentations. All the details are available on the conference site. I look forward to seeing you there. And we will have our weekly closing discussion event tomorrow after those workshops, which I think is a brilliant space for further discussion and chat and to capture people's thoughts and ideas. I am not going to keep talking because I know people are probably keen to talk among themselves in the next session. But thank you all for being here. And once again, thank you to Anne and Tom for our first keynote talk.
Cheers.
And
Enjoy
with
the rest
that,
of the
I'm
conference.
going to sign off. Thank you.
Bye,
Bye.
everybody.